During his more than 35 years of reporting, journalist George Knapp has been called the UFO Reporter. His work is now the focus of a new Netflix docu-series. Holly Menino caught up with him about his reporting and new series.
George Knapp is an award-winning journalist, most notably known for his work investigating what many refer to as UFOs. George, thank you so much for joining me.
Good morning. Good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you as well. Your work is the focus of a new Netflix docu-series. What is Investigation Alien about, and what will viewers get or can expect to get from it?
Well, Netflix has had a lot of proposals over the last couple of years about UFO shows, UFO films, documentaries. They wanted to produce their own. So about 2 years ago, they sought me out to ask if I'd be willing to be part of it. And, it was basically to bring the public. What appealed to me is the chance to bring the world public up to par, up to speed on what UFOs are and why it's a legitimate mystery. We were able to travel all over the world, 23, 24 states, including up in the Pacific Northwest and Montana, Utah, Colorado, California, Nevada, Arizona, Texas, the East Coast, Brazil, Mexico, to try to investigate old cases and new, and brought back a lot of information. I was intrigued by the possibility of appealing to a global audience. And since it's come out, wow, I was overwhelmed by the response from people all over the world. I mean, every day I'm getting tons of emails from Portugal and Iceland, Ireland, India, Tanzania, Tasmania, everywhere.
Did you expect that type of reaction?
I was hoping so. I hope we would connect with the audience, but I've been chasing this UFO mystery for a long time, and I recognize that it touches the pulse of the public in a way that before I started down this road, I would not have understood. It really is a question, an issue that appeals to all of us. I think we all want to know, are we alone? It's one of the fundamental questions of human existence.
This is something you've been reporting on for what, 30 years now?
37,
years.
long time. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit how you got started.
The story walked in the door at KLAS TV. I've been there for a number of years by that point, and somebody walked in the studio, into the newsroom with a stack of what I learned were UFO documents. They tried to introduce that information to my boss, who wanted nothing to do with it. And the guy who was carrying that information, John Lear, son of the guy who developed the Lear jet, had been a CIA pilot, had flown every plane in the world. Before he left, I said, "Hey, let me take a look at that stuff," and it was really interesting material squeezed out of the government through FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, government documents in which it looked like these military agencies, intelligence agencies, behind closed doors were telling each other, "Hey, this is serious. We need to figure it out. It's not us. It's not Russians. It's not Chinese. It's from somewhere else," and then telling the public something completely different. That's what really hooked me on the topic. It's not the question of who are they, where are they from. It's how our government has reacted to it and how they have lied to the public for so long. It basically ticked me off. It still does.
It's not often you have a story that walks right in the door for you. What has it been like as you have reported on this over the years? What has the reaction been like?
Well, the reaction from the public has been overwhelmingly positive. They can't get enough of it. So, I became within a matter of a couple of months, I became the UFO reporter. I am still the UFO reporter, although I've covered a lot of other topics in my career. And, so people would stop me in restaurants, at the grocery store, standing at a urinal, at a red light. They want to talk about UFOs. Mostly they ask, do I really believe this stuff? And I say, well, I believe it's an interesting story and it's worthwhile, but they really want to tell me their story. And everyone seems to have one, either their own sighting or somebody in their family or some mystery that's gnawed at their brain for a long period of time. The public loved it. My colleagues in journalism were not so kind to me. So I got beat up on a fairly regular basis by newspaper columnists and radio DJs and media critics for a number of years. Still happens to some degree. I don't care. It comes with the territory. I'm not thin-skinned, but it's always curious to me how our colleagues in journalism could dismiss this subject without ever doing any of the actual work themselves. So I got hooked on it a long time ago, largely because of the lies that have been told to the public by our government and by our military.
What have been some of your key moments or, some of the bigger stories you've covered in your last 37 years of covering this topic?
Well, I jumped into the deep end of the pool right off the bat, exploring allegations about advanced technology being tested and developed out at a little place called Area 51. And I know that now everyone all over the world knows what that base means. It's sort of a dichotomy, a walking contradiction, the most famous secret base in the world. But back then, nobody outside of Nevada had heard of it unless you'd worked there. So we started doing stories about alleged alien technology being reverse engineered out at Area 51. And I was just pursuing it like a regular news story, finding information, see if witnesses would talk to me, gather what little tidbits I could at the time. And the response again from the government was pretty remarkable in that, basically Area 51 was for a long time non-existent. If you asked the Air Force or CIA about it, they'd say, what base? We could see satellite photos of it taken by the Russians, but as far as the American taxpayers, the people who paid the bills for that place out there, we're not told what was going on. If you had alien technology, call it that, air quotes around it, if you had it and wanted to test it and develop it, Area 51 would be one of the places where you would do that. And we had a number of witnesses who said they had seen things. So I pursued the story, as outrageous as it might seem, and the response from the public was absolutely off the charts. Phone ringing off the hook, other sources coming forward, additional leads. That wasn't just reverse engineering technology; it was cattle mutilations, alleged abductions, all the big, vast tapestry of different story threads that make up the modern UFO mystery.
My goodness. During Investigation Alien, the Netflix docu-series, you mentioned that you cover some Pacific Northwest sightings. Can you talk a little bit about what people might discover in the docu-series that relates to the Pacific Northwest, whether it's at, in Hanford and Eastern Washington, or possibly even near Mount Rainier?
I had looked at Yakima, Washington, as a UFO hotspot years ago. That's where Kenneth Arnold, the whole modern UFO era started in Washington with the Kenneth Arnold sighting. But the Kenneth Arnold story that's been told to the public really isn't accurate. His experiences went way beyond just seeing some strange things in the sky. I had dug into the stories about Yakima because it's one of the key UFO hotspots around the country. And then more recently, these cattle mutilations that have happened up in Oregon, they've been going on for the past 4 or 5 years. We went up to talk to some of the ranchers, to lawmen who have been investigating it. And what we heard was similar to what I've heard all across the country where these outbreaks have happened before. Cattle are carved up with surgical precision in the middle of the night. Whoever does it doesn't leave any tracks. There's no machinery tracks. There's no human tracks. There's no animal tracks. They are completely drained of blood. Often the animals are left in a strange pose, like with their heads standing up, even though they've been drained of blood. There's been more than 10,000 of these cases across the American West. Not one person has ever been caught. We talked to the ranchers, and I remember in this one episode that people will see in the Netflix series, the ranchers, I asked him, have you seen anything else strange in the sky? He says, oh, yeah, there's a giant UFO hovering over my field. And I look out in the field and there's these great big circles in the grass. I said, what's that? He said, well, those things appear every year or so when we see these things in the sky. And at the same time that the animals have been carved up, it's like crop circles. So crop circles, animal mutilations, UFO sightings, all in the same area over a period of a couple of years. And it's still going on. That was a pretty interesting story.
What do you hope viewers take away from Investigation Alien when they watch it?
Well, I hope they see that this is a legitimate mystery. It is ongoing. Whatever this thing is, it's intelligent. It interacts with humans. It always has been here to one degree or another. Sometimes it appears to be menacing. One of the trips we took in this Netflix series was to Colares, Brazil, way out in the Amazon River Delta, this little tiny island that in 1977, UFOs came out of the water, came out of the sky, shot what appeared to be laser beams at hundreds of people who were injured. The injuries were real, burns and indentations. We've tracked down some of those witnesses who had been interviewed by the Brazilian Air Force back when this happened, and they had never been on camera before. And they told us, look, these things, we were scared to death. It was hundreds of them, maybe thousands of people who were affected by this. Many of them just left their homes and got out of Dodge because they were so frightened. But they had these injuries that were not just burns. It was a sampling operation. People had shot something, whoever they were coming out of the sky, shot these beams of light that had filaments inside of them and took blood samples and tissue samples. Now, who's doing a sampling operation like that back in 1977? The Brazilian Air Force investigated this for a year and a half, then put its files away, hid them away from the public. Some of them had leaked out. Some of them came to a secret American investigation that was based here in Las Vegas, and I got to see those files. But for the most part, the people to whom this had happened had never spoken on camera before, and we tracked them down and heard their story.
George, what has it been like being in Las Vegas? Kind of, I mean, as you mentioned, the epicenter of some of these really big stories, and sometimes really the origin of where the UFO story has started.
Yeah, Las Vegas for a number of years was sort of the unofficial, off the books UFO investigation capital of the world. I lucked into it. Some of the first people I met after my first UFO series became key people in the stories that are unfolding right now. Senator Harry Reid, who became the Senate Majority Leader, was the first person I told about Area 51 outside of our newsroom. That relationship that we developed back there in 1989 lasted for the rest of his life. He would confide in me. I'd tell him things and keep him up to par. And it really proved fortuitous because years later, Senator Reid is the primary sponsor of the largest government-funded UFO investigation in history. It was called OSAP, the Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program, and not a great acronym, but it was he secured $22 million. There was a contract under the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, to follow the evidence wherever it led, not only to try to figure out UFO technology to see if we could reverse engineer it, build our own, but to investigate the impact on humans, injuries, psychological effects, things of that sort. People who've had interactions with these beings and craft wherever they're from, how it affected their lives. They created the world's largest UFO database, 260,000 cases. They had teams on the ground that went to hotspots like Yakima, like Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. They gathered information from all over the world, put it into this database, wrote an incredible number of reports, and not one page of that material has ever been made public. I've been reporting about it for a couple of years now because the two men who were directors of that program became my co-authors, and we revealed what we could. It took something like 14 months to get the Pentagon censors to allow us to print that, but the actual pages of all those reports has still not been made public. That's a gigantic story, and it happened right here in my backyard, and I was lucky enough to know the people who were involved with it. I could not report it at the time that it was happening, but I knew someday I was going to put that story out.
Where does your work go from here? What do you see coming next for you, the Netflix series, and just your continual reporting?
I don't know what's going to happen with Netflix. I mean, the initial response was big. It jumped within 24 hours. It was in the top 5 programs on Netflix, which is pretty good. As I said, I've been getting responses from all over the world, and it just does not stop. So I would think there'd be an appetite for further seasons, but I don't think Netflix has made a decision on that. They spent a lot of money on this thing. I mean, we traveled to Brazil and Mexico and all over the U.S., usually had a crew of like 10 people with us. They had 4 different producers who worked on it. They had editors. So I can't even imagine what the budget was or whether they are going to be able to recoup that. But I hope that it continues because obviously there's an appetite among the world public in this topic. But I'm still employed at KLAS. I'll probably be there until they shove me out the door. I'm not sure how much longer I can keep going, but it's hard to walk away from this subject matter, given how hot it is, how active the topic is. The drone swarms that are happening right now are just the latest iteration. But, the public wants to know what's going on. I'm still trying to get answers for them.
Thoughts about all these drone sightings that are happening, not just on the East Coast, but various other parts of the country?
It's going on all over the world now. First of all, I think that it's a really unique opportunity for a real-time study of how the public reacts to unknown aircraft in the sky night after night over a widespread basis. I think our government would have previously predicted widespread panic. The public's not panicking. They're intensely interested in it. They're out every night with their cell phone cameras trying to capture images of whatever it is that's flying around out there. Number 2, it's an interesting to see how the government's reacted to this. We're being told by the U.S. military, by the White House, Don't worry about it. It's not a threat. We're pretty sure that most of these things are just hobbyist drones. It's not a big deal. Everyone move along, nothing to see here. Well, that's just not the case. And the public isn't buying it. These things have flown into restricted airspace night after night. It's now a list of something like 8 or 9 U.S. military installations that have been overflown, nuclear power plants, nuclear missile bases, and silos. That's a serious matter. And although they can say it's not a threat because they haven't attacked, whoever's flying these drones, and I'm using air quotes around that again, haven't used laser beams to melt the White House or anything. But if you're going into restricted airspace, if we are unable, using our best technology, if we're unable to track them, we can't see them coming, we don't know where they're going, we can't deter them, that's serious. That's a serious matter. We had a year ago this month, we had drones inside restricted airspace of Langley Air Force Base night after night for a period of a couple of weeks, one of our most important and most restricted bases. This past week, we had Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, a key Air Force installation, shut down because of drones for a month. In the UK, 3 of our most critical bases in the UK were infiltrated by drones night after night after night. They used our most sophisticated anti-drone technology and were unable to bring them down. And they can't track them. I'm sorry, but I consider that to be a threat, or at least a potential threat, even if they haven't attacked us. And the military, again, is so used to lying to the public and telling us nothing to see here, folks, that's sort of its go-to position. For the past couple of years, they have used drones as sort of the all-purpose excuse for what people are seeing in the sky. Used to be swamp gas and weather balloons. Now it's drones. We don't know what these drones are. There was an outbreak of them 5 years ago in all over the middle of the country, Colorado, Nebraska, 4 different states. Night after night, dozens of these things in the sky. They were doing a grid pattern, and then it suddenly went away, and we never got an answer to that. 6 years ago, off the West Coast, 2019, July, 10 U.S. Navy warships were buzzed by more than 100 of these things. It went on for several days in a row. They would appear on radar and then off radar. They'd get really close to the ships. Some of them were captured on thermal images. They were big, round, 14-foot across circles, no known propulsion system, no wings, no rotor, no tail. How do they fly? They flew along with these ships for more than an hour, made a demonstration that they're real and they're here, and then they went away. Some of them went into the water. We don't have that technology. We don't have technology that does that. But it was explained away as drones. It wasn't just drones. I mean, maybe they're drones in a strict sort of a definition of the term, but they're somebody else's technology. And I think it's incumbent on our military to tell us the truth about it.
Why do you think historically the government has been so not just tight-lipped, but negligent in reporting what was truly going on? I mean, this dates back years and years ago from your first days of reporting.
I think that probably what we would call the cover-up started with good intentions. The modern UFO era started in 1947. We'd just come out of World War II, a terrible carnage that had covered the whole world. I think they were probably not all that thrilled about the idea that we've got a new adversary, that suddenly there's this advanced technology appearing in our skies, again, over our most sensitive installations. Roswell was the home to the world's only atomic bomber wing at the time. Los Alamos Labs, Sandia, those places were inundated with UFOs and strange objects. And I think they didn't want the public to panic. And then as years went on, I think they lied so much about it and told so many fibs that they painted themselves into a corner. Now, at this point, I think that the real reason for the cover-up is the technology. There is a race for this technology. We have recovered discs and materials that have been analyzed in aerospace hangars and among defense contractors for decades. We haven't figured out how it works yet. We know that the Russians have similar materials. We know the Chinese are doing the same thing. And there is a race for the technology. So there are legitimate national security concerns because whoever gets that stuff first, assuming we can ever crack anti-gravity, whoever gets it first wins. So I sympathize with the government to some degree. I also sympathize with it because I'm not sure that anyone knows the ultimate answer. They have more information than the public does because they have the means to collect it. Sensor systems and satellites and radar systems and a worldwide military presence. They gather that information and stash it somewhere, and they know more than us. Doesn't mean they know the ultimate answers, though. It doesn't mean they know where these things come from. Maybe they're not from other planets. Maybe they're from here. Maybe they live in the ocean. There are really intriguing questions, big questions that have interested me and have interested the public since the start of the modern UFO era. We're not getting any answers, not willingly anyway. So I think that for journalists like us, Holly, we it's our job to kind of dig in and see what we can find out.
Yeah, and keep asking those questions.